Now we can use CSS to style this up a little bit. Go back to Atom. You click on style.css, it'll show up here with your index.html. There's nothing in it now, but we can add some stuff to it. But first, we need to have a way that this style CSS talks to the index.html file. And the way to do that is to go into our index.html file, scroll back to the top, in where the head is, go underneath meta character set, and use the HTML tag called link. And then what we'll do is tell the browser that we want to link up index.html file and the style.css file. So here we go. We use href, same as we did down here with the A, but we use href equals double quotes. Sometimes Atom will auto-complete it for you, or you have to type it yourself. I had to type it myself just then. That's okay. So what we want to do is write the file path from index to style, and the way to write that in this case is to write the folder name first, then a slash, then the word style.css, because that's what it's called, and that is how you write the href to the link. And there's two more pieces we need. So if you hit the space bar, you'll have options here. So the first one you want to click is rel, and then you can type it in or scroll down to style sheet, because that's what it is. And then after the quotes, again, one more space, we want to add one more thing called type, and then the only option you have is text/CSS, and that's what you want. So click text.css, and don't forget to add the right arrow bracket. There's no need to close this with a closing link tag. It's not necessary for this case, and I'll explain why in a second. But here is the way that we link href or link href rel type to our style.css file. So let's save this. So the reason we don't write a closing link tag is because anything that doesn't show up on the page, like content, doesn't need to be closed. So this is not going to show up as these words in our browser. So there's no need to have the closing tag here. The title, this is the title that will show up in the browser window, in the browser tab. So we want to close this title tag here. The H1 shows up in the browser, so that gets a closing tag. The H2 shows up in the browser, so that gets a closing tag. We go down to image. Now wait a minute, image doesn't have a closing tag. Why is that? Well, in the browser, you don't actually see the words img/cpi 2018.jpg. You see what happens is this is a link that goes to wherever it's being stored and puts it onto the page. So there's no need to actually close this using an img closing tag. So no need for img closing tag. So now that we've written our link to the style.css page, we can go into the style.css file itself and start adding stuff to it so that we can style up our boring looking browser page of text and a picture. So in our style.css file, this is where we tell the browser that we want this content to look a certain way. So the way we do that is to tell the browser specifically what pieces of HTML should get what kind of style. So let's start with the about div. Okay, so in our about div, we'll do a few things. If you remember back, let's go to the style.css file. You remember back to the box model, every piece of content had height and width and a border and padding and a margin. So let's tell a browser that we want a certain height and width for that about div, and a certain border and a certain padding and margin. And this will become more clear once we actually do it. So what we can do is in the CSS, we'll write some instructions for the browser to do some style things to the content in the HTML. So the first thing is we need to tell the browser where to go. So if you look back in our HTML file real quick for 1 second, we've got this div class equals about. So this will differentiate this div from the next one. So you can add a certain style to this and a different style to that. So let's go to the about, back to CSS. Now the way to write class in the CSS is slightly different than the way we wrote it in HTML. In our CSS file, if we want to start styling things about the about div, you write a period and then the word about. That's how you reference that div back in the HTML file. And the next thing we need to do is look for your curly brackets. Curly brackets look like this. Now, all of the styling that we want to do to the HTML of the about div will go inside these curly brackets. Now, what I like to do is to hit return when I'm having the cursor in between the two brackets so that we can write it in between here. So the first thing we can do is add a width. So width, colon. Now we can pick any width we want. Maybe we'll do 500 pixels. You can use pixels, you can use percentages. Eventually we'll use percentages for the whole thing, but sometimes you'll need to use pixels. So we'll put 500 pixels and then a semicolon. And then the next bit of information is from the box model, a height. So maybe we want a height of also 500 pixels. It'll depend on your mockup. Our mockup doesn't look like this. I'm just using this as an example, just to show you what it looks like. Again, 500 pixels, whoops, semicolon. We had the opportunity to put a border around our content. So let's do that here. That's using border. Now, I'll show you the shorthand for border because we want the same border on the top, right, bottom, and left sides. So we want a 2-pixel border in a red color, and we want a solid line. And then you don't forget your semicolon here. So this will make a 2-pixel red solid line border around the whole piece of content called about. Now there are nuances as to how to write the border. If you want to write different sides should get different colors or different widths or a different type of line. There's dashed lines, there's dotted lines. You can specify that in a couple of ways, but right now, let's stick with this simple 2-pixel red solid border all around. So once we've saved this, we can go back and take a look at what we have in our browser. So if we refresh this browser, now we've added some style to it. Here we are. So now we have a 2-pixel red border, solid line all around. The width of the div is 500 pixels in this direction and 500 pixels in this direction. So the width is 500, the height is 500, all our content fits in there. And so what we told the browser to do, the browser did. Let's go back to our atom. Okay, so let's continue with this about div. Remember in our box model, we had something called padding and we had something called margin. Let's add some padding. So right now, when I write the word padding, you see that there's padding left, padding right, padding by itself, padding top, and padding bottom. So you can get very specific on how you structure or how you style your padding for your content. So you can be very specific, just your padding left can get a certain type and your padding right can get another type. I'm just going to go with padding for all around. Let's say, just for example's sake, we'll do 50 pixels. Now, just saying padding by itself and 50 pixels by itself, that means for the top, right, bottom, and left sides of this content box, it's going to get 50 pixels of padding. So if I save this, go back to my browser. So this is what it looks like before. When I refresh it, we should have some space in between this border and our content, this text. So I'll click refresh. We should have 50 pixels around this text on all four sides. 1, 2, 3, refresh. And here it is. So here's 50 pixels here, 50 pixels here, 50 pixels here. There's more here, but in any case, our content is 50 pixels all around. The way to see this in another way, we go to either right click for inspect, or we go to either right click into inspect or view developer inspect elements or developer tools. You want to do developer tools. This will give you the source code. And then here is a panel that tells you what's being applied at the current moment in terms of style. So our content, our entire content is here. We can get very specific, use the pointer in the top left and ask, okay, here's this piece of content, here's this piece of content. So if I click this selector and click into where we put our padding, we can get confirmation that, hey, here's our 500 by 500 box, here's the 50 pixels of padding we asked for, and here's our 2 pixels of border that we asked for. So this is developer tools. Safari has this also. It's in a slightly different spot, but it does the same thing. So let's close this. So now we have padding in our content. Let's go back to Atom one more time. And we can add margin. Let's do 25 pixels this time so you can see the difference. So margin is the space around the border. So it would be sort of in between different pieces of content. So if we save this, go back to our browser one more time, and refresh, we should have a more increased space around this red border. 1, 2, 3, refresh. Now we have more space in between at least the left and top sides. And there's more space in between this side also, 25 pixels worth. Let's go back to Atom one more time. So back in Atom, 3 more things we can do with this box is add a box shadow, like a drop shadow. And the way to write a box shadow is to specify the horizontal offset. This is how much it goes in the horizontal direction. And then the next number we'll type is the vertical offset. And then we can tell it what color to be. So we'll do, let's say, 5 pixels, the horizontal direction. And in the vertical direction, we'll do 10 pixels maybe. And then let's do black. So this is a very short version of writing box shadow. So let's just see that. Save this, go back to our browser. So if we refresh this, then we should have a little box shadow down here and over here. So 1, 2, 3, refresh. Here is our 5 pixel offset to the horizontal direction to the right, 5 pixels to the right, and then 10 pixels down. And the shadow here is black, just like we asked it to do. Let's go back to Atom. The second thing we can add on top of this is change the background color of it. Background dash color. So we can add any color we want. Now, in CSS and HTML, there's a range of ways we can write the color that we want. So we can use a set of approved words like cyan, cyan, or red. There's a whole list of these. I'll put that link in Canvas so you can see. Or you can do RGB values. So, for example, RGB, that's RGB. Now here you have two options from Atom. You can do RGB, and then the RGB values, say 255, 0, and 0, or you can do RGBA. The A stands for the alpha channel. For those of you who know Photoshop, the A, alpha channel, is transparency. So the number 0.5 is half opaque or half transparent. Or if you wanted to do the whole thing opaque, 1.0. So this is a way to get some transparency in it. So let's try that. Let's do 255, 0, whoops, 0, and 0.5. So half opacity, semicolon, save. Go back to the browser. So if we refresh this, we should have a 50% red color like pink. So 1, 2, 3, refresh. And here's your 50% red color. Let's go back to Atom. One more thing you could do for this about div is tell the browser how you want to calculate the width of your content. So conventionally, our box, our content, is this size plus the padding that we added to it. So it's not just a width of 500 pixels, it's 500 plus 50, because we added 50 pixels of padding all around. So it's really 600 wide here and 600 tall here. So let's go to Atom, and we can change that. Maybe we want it to be 500 pixels no matter how much padding is in it. So to do that, we can do box sizing. Right now, our box is 500 pixels wide plus the 50 pixels of padding on either side. This is already called content box because the content width is only applied to the width here. But if we change this to border box, then everything inside the border has to be 500 pixels wide. So it'll include the padding, not be in addition to the padding. So if we change this to border box, save this, Go back to our browser. Refresh this, it should shrink down to be 500 pixels total. 1, 2, 3, refresh. And now it's shrunk down. The whole thing is 50 or 500 pixels wide. Same again, 500 pixels tall. Now I'll show you two more things. So if we scroll down, we'll notice that this link is underlined. Most of the time you don't want that, or if you do want that, you want to be able to control it. So we can go to our code, back to Atom, and we'll get out of this about div, start a new thing. So maybe for all of the links in our page, we'll just use the A. So HTML tags get this, can just type out like this. We want our curly brackets. And then inside that, we want text decoration. Now we have many options here. What I want to do is, I don't want the line underneath, so we'll click none, save this, and then if we go back to our browser, this should take the underline away. 1, 2, 3, refresh, and now the link has no underline here. So that's good. That's usually how you like it. Now let me show you one more thing with these links. Back to Atom again. Now we want to start new line. Back to A. And now I'll show you something called a pseudo class. Pseudo class, so it's attached to, usually it's attached to something like a link. So we'll add a colon, and we'll do visited. And we want curly brackets again. So this is saying when a link is visited, it'll have this style to it. So maybe instead of the default purple that you saw back in the browser, we want our links when they're visited to turn red. So for the color of text, it's just color. And then whatever way you want to write color, like RGBA or just the word red. We save this, go back to our browser, refresh our browser. Here it's purple now. Refresh, 1, 2, 3, refresh. Now it's red. So that worked. Let's go back to Atom again. And there's two more pseudo classes that I'll show you. The first one is, whoops, A colon, no space, hover. So using this action of hovering over the link, we can have this style applied, and maybe I'll go back to text decoration and say I want it underlined when I hover over it. That's the convention these days, is to, if your link isn't already underlined, you can provide some kind of visual separation from links and regular text by having it underlined when you hover over it. So if I save this, go back one more time to the browser, go down to our link, see it's red because we visited before. We click 1, 2, 3, refresh, and then hover over it, you'll see a underline when we hover over it. So this is a little bit of interactivity. Most of the time we need to have JavaScript do interactivity, but here is some interaction. Okay. One more called A active. Now you may not see this as well because computers have gone much faster and processing speeds are much faster. It used to be when you clicked on a link, it took a little time for it to get going, and so you could style how it looks while it was getting going. So maybe we'll do color. Maybe here we'll do cyan, see if you actually see it. I'm not so sure we'll see it, but this is what you can use. So let's see if that actually works. So if I click on it, in a split second, you may see it go cyan. So let's click. Didn't really get to see it, fortunately, but that's A active. All right. So this is our example website so far. Doesn't look nearly anything like our site, but we're still working on it. So if your site looks like this, then you're good to go for next week. So make sure you submit the code that you've written here back into Canvas for this assignment, and then we'll build on this next week.